Most people pray like they are negotiating with someone who might say no. You ask repeatedly because you doubt the answer will come. You raise your voice in hope and lower it in exhaustion. And somewhere between the asking and the waiting, prayer becomes a burden instead of a foundation. This is not how confident faith operates, and it is certainly not how Jesus approached the Father before performing miracles. There is a structure to prayer that produces calm conviction rather than anxious pleading, and today we examine the forgotten pattern that restores both spiritual authority and emotional steadiness in a world built on doubt. I am Rabbi Ben, and today we examine a tension that many faithful people carry in silence. You have prayed for years, you have asked with sincerity, you have raised your voice in hope and lowered it in exhaustion. And yet, somewhere along the way, prayer stopped bringing the peace it once promised. Instead of confidence, you feel uncertainty. Instead of clarity, you feel fatigue. This is not a failure of faith. This is what happens when the foundation beneath our prayers becomes unstable. For those of us who want to leave more than words to the next generation, who want to model spiritual strength rather than spiritual confusion, this matters deeply. Prayer should be a pillar that holds us steady. It should anchor the mind and fortify the heart. It should connect us to God in a way that produces calm leadership, not anxious hoping. But for too many adults, prayer has become a ritual performed without conviction, a plea spoken without trust, a habit drained of power. The gap between what prayer should produce and what we actually experience is the starting point. We cannot build what we refuse to name. Prayer, when practiced without structure, often becomes a form of emotional dependence rather than spiritual alignment. You ask because you are afraid. You repeat because you are uncertain. You plead because you do not believe that trust alone will hold. This is understandable. Life in midlife carries weight. You carry responsibilities for aging parents, growing children, financial pressure, professional demands, and the quiet burden of leading a household that looks to you for steadiness. You cannot afford to live in spiritual uncertainty when others depend on your clarity. Fear-based asking does not build faith, it weakens it. Every time you pray from desperation rather than from trust, you train your heart to doubt that God hears, that God responds, that God acts with intention toward your life. This erodes leadership. A leader who cannot pray with confidence cannot lead with confidence. A parent who begs God in panic will raise children who see faith as fragile. A spouse who turns prayer into emotional venting will not model the spiritual maturity that a household needs. We must prepare the ground for a different way, one that stabilizes rather than shakes, one that builds rather than breaks. There is a moment recorded in the life of Jesus that changes everything if you let it. Before raising Lazarus from the dead, before anything visible shifted, Jesus thanked the Father, not after the miracle, before it. He stood at the tomb and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Notice the structure. He did not beg. He did not plead for proof. He did not ask God to show up and perform. He thanked God as though the work was already in motion, as though trust was not a risk but a reality. This is not a religious trick. This is an ethical stance. Gratitude before results is a declaration that the relationship is solid, that the Father responds, that alignment exists even when circumstances scream otherwise. It builds inner strength because it forces you to stand on conviction rather than emotion. Emotional pleading creates dependency. Gratitude creates discipline. One trains you to need constant reassurance. The other trains you to walk with steady trust. This is the forgotten pattern, not because it was hidden, but because it requires maturity to practice. If you are ready to move from anxious asking to grounded faith, write this in the comments. I need steadier faith. Before Jesus ever made a request, he addressed the Father. This was not casual, it was foundational. Relationship comes before petition. Connection comes before asking. When you begin prayer by establishing who God is to you and who you are to God, you shift the entire emotional tone from insecurity to trust. A son does not beg his father for bread as though the father might withhold it. A son asks because the relationship already guarantees care. This is not arrogance. This is confidence rooted in covenant. Strong families operate this way. A reliable spouse does not need to be convinced to act with integrity. A faithful partner does not require constant reassurance before fulfilling responsibility. The bond itself creates expectation. The same applies to prayer. When you begin by grounding yourself in the Father, you remind your heart that this is not a transaction with a distant force. This is alignment with the one who knows you, sustains you, and responds with intention. This changes everything. It removes the panic. It steadies the voice. It allows you to pray as someone who belongs, not as someone begging for entry. Ethical prayer begins here, in the recognition that relationship precedes request and trust precedes results. Gratitude before results is not pretending that nothing is wrong. It is declaring that trust already exists. When you thank God before the outcome changes, you are practicing a form of faithful discipline that most people never develop. You are training your heart to believe that God hears, that God acts, that God moves with purpose even when you cannot yet see the evidence. This is mature faith. It reduces anxiety because it removes the need for constant proof. It builds spiritual consistency because it does not depend on circumstances to dictate your confidence. Think of it this way. If you trust a business partner deeply, you thank them before the contract closes because you know their character. You do not wait for the signature to believe they will act with integrity. The gratitude itself is an expression of the bond. The same applies to prayer. When you thank God before results appear, you are not manipulating outcomes. You are stabilizing your own heart by anchoring it to what you already know about His nature. This is not wishful thinking. This is spiritual steadiness. It trains you to walk in calm conviction rather than fearful hoping. And over time, that steadiness becomes the foundation for everything else you build. Words spoken aloud carry weight that silent thoughts do not. When you say something with your voice, you anchor belief in a way that internal hoping never achieves. This is why Jesus spoke His prayers aloud. He did not merely think gratitude, He declared it. Spoken conviction pushes back internal doubt. It forces the mind to align with what the mouth confesses. It creates psychological and spiritual coherence. You cannot speak certainty and hold fear at the same time. The act of verbalizing trust interrupts the cycle of anxious questioning. Leaders understand this principle. A father who speaks calm direction into a crisis steadies everyone around him. A manager who voices confidence in uncertain times gives the team permission to believe. The same applies to prayer. When you speak gratitude aloud, when you address the Father with steady words, you are not performing for an audience. You are establishing authority over your own internal chaos. You are building a habit of verbal alignment that strengthens faith over time. This is not about volume. This is about intentionality. Quiet, firm, spoken conviction stabilizes the heart because it trains you to take responsibility for what you believe, not just what you feel. It moves faith from the realm of wishful emotion into the realm of deliberate practice. There are 3 anchors that hold faith steady when circumstances try to shake it. First, you address the Father. You begin by grounding yourself in relationship, not in need. Second, you thank Him before results appear. You declare trust as an act of discipline, not as a reaction to proof. Third, you speak with certainty. You use your voice to anchor conviction and push back doubt. Together, these 3 elements create a structure that produces calm, grounded faith rather than anxious hoping. They build emotional resilience because they do not depend on external validation. They build spiritual resilience because they train you to stand on what you know about God rather than on what you see in the moment. This is not a formula to manipulate outcomes. This is a framework to stabilize your heart so that you can lead with clarity, parent with confidence, and walk through uncertainty without collapsing into fear. When you practice this model consistently, you stop praying like someone desperate for rescue and start praying like someone aligned with the Father. That shift changes everything. If one of these three principles feels most powerful to you right now, write it in the comments. Tell me which anchor you need most. Now we move from principle to practice. You cannot build spiritual strength through theory alone. You must implement this prayer model daily, with the same consistency you bring to work, to exercise, to managing your household. Structure creates strength. Begin each morning by addressing the Father aloud. Say His name with intention. Remind yourself that you are not speaking to a distant force, but to the one who knows you and sustains you. Then, before you list your concerns, thank Him for what He is already doing, even if you cannot yet see the evidence. Thank Him for hearing you. Thank Him for moving with purpose in your life. Thank Him for the relationship that allows you to speak with confidence. Finally, speak your requests with calm certainty, not with desperate pleading. State what you need as someone who trusts the outcome is already being handled. This is not arrogance. This is alignment. Do this every day for 30 days, not because repetition creates magic, but because consistency creates habit, and habit creates character. Prayer practiced this way becomes a discipline like budgeting or physical training. It is not a crisis tool you grab in panic. It is a foundation you build slowly, steadily, with intention and integrity. When you pray this way consistently, something shifts inside you. The changes are not loud, they are deep. You will notice that fear no longer controls your thoughts the way it once did. You will feel clarity where confusion used to live. You will find yourself speaking to your spouse, your children, your colleagues with more steadiness and less reactivity. This happens because gratitude-based prayer reduces the emotional dependency that keeps people anxious. When you stop begging and start trusting, your heart learns to rest in what is already secure rather than scrambling for proof. Emotional stability grows when trust becomes a habit. Spiritual confidence grows when alignment becomes your default. This makes you a stronger spouse because you are no longer dragging fear into every conversation. It makes you a better parent because your children see faith as solid, not fragile. It makes you a more effective leader because people sense the calm authority that comes from someone who knows how to stand steady when circumstances shake. This is not about perfection. This is about progression. Every day you practice this model, you lay another brick in the foundation of a life built on trust rather than panic, and over time, that foundation holds everything else you are trying to build. I leave you with this encouragement. The path forward is not complicated, but it does require patience and integrity. You will not master this prayer model in a week. You will stumble. You will forget. You will fall back into old patterns of anxious asking. That is expected. What matters is that you return to the structure, that you keep addressing the Father, that you keep thanking Him before results appear, that you keep speaking with steady conviction. This is about alignment, not control. You are not trying to manipulate God into doing what you want. You are learning to trust that He already moves with purpose, that He already hears, that He already responds. And as that trust deepens, you will find yourself becoming the kind of person who can carry weight without breaking, who can lead without panicking, who can leave a legacy of faith that others can actually follow. This is the work. This is the blessing. Walk this path with the same seriousness you bring to any other responsibility in your life. And if you are ready to commit to practicing this prayer model for the next 30 days, write this in the comments. I commit to 30 days of grounded faith. I will walk with you.